Welcome back. I'm in New York City today, and probably can't see that, but that's the George Washington Bridge in the back, and I'm on the west side. Most people don't know that the second biggest park in Manhattan is Riverside Park, and that's right here, and the Hudson River is right there, and the George Washington Bridge is right there. You might not be able to see it, but take my word for it. So today we're going to talk about an assumption that I like to question, which has to do with the notion that the secret to success is working hard. I couldn't disagree more, and I'm going to explain to you why that is. There will be some noise in the background, including some swearing, I'm sure, so bear with me. I was at a conference in New York City, a photo conference called Build this week. And a pretty famous videographer called Jared Polin came up and gave a presentation. And he said something that was designed to inspire people who do videos, I guess, videos and YouTube stations. YouTube channels, I guess. And the inspiration was, hey, you know, if you work hard, you too can be like me. And I've obviously heard that before, maybe you've heard that before, but it strikes me as one of those middle class lies that just makes no sense. It keeps you middle class. Now, as I've said before, when I say middle class, I'm not using it in a pejorative sense. I'm making the analytic point through the lens of economics that people who sell their skilled labor for cash flow are middle class, and those who live off of capital and don't need to work are part of the investor class. And my point is, if you hang around a lot of middle class people, you will pick up a lot of middle class ideas, and I think one of those is if you work super hard, you're going to succeed. Now, when I was in Wall Street, I've mentioned stories about Hannibal, not his real name, and Centaur Capital, and John Arnold. John Arnold's worth maybe, I don't know, $5 billion now. And Hannibal is worth maybe $700 million now. And the question you have to ask is, did they get there by working super, super hard? And the answer is no. And so let me illustrate this with two examples. So the first example is Salgado. Now, Salgado is a Brazilian photographer, and one of his favorite subjects is actually workers, sort of like miners and people. So he has this famous photograph that I always wanted to buy, but I never did, which is of these mine workers in Brazil. So the picture is, there's this big mine pit, and there are these ropes, and the ropes connect the bottom of the mine to the top of the mine. So what these miners do is they put coal in their satchel, and they climb up these string ropes, and when they get to the top, they go back down, and they do it again and again and again. They do this 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So he has this picture where these workers are arranged in a row, one after another. He sets the exposure to the first guy that's in focus, and the focus is on him, and everybody behind him is blurred. That's called bokeh in photography. And what's remarkable of these people is that all you can see is the white of their eyes, because their whole face is covered with black, the black soot of coal. And there's this look in their eyes, and it's the look of people that are basically in like living hell. And what Jared Polin was essentially saying to those people, whether he realizes it or not, is, man, work a little harder and you will be successful. Now let's compare that to somebody that I've talked about, but we'll flesh it out a little bit today, called Hannibal, that I used to be at Salomon Brothers with. Now Hannibal, you're talking about a young, kind of cocky 20-year-old guy. His undergrad was at Caltech. Now for those of you who don't know, Caltech is much more prestigious, arguably, than MIT, certainly harder to get into, much smaller. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, was teaching there. And a lot of Nobel laureates teach there. I think per capita has more Nobel laureates than any other American university, possibly more living Nobel laureates than any university in the world. So he was there. Now, Hannibal is kind of like me. He's a little lazy, and that's unfortunately where the similarities end, because he's a lot richer than I am. And his years at Caltech were ones of wine, women, and song. I mean, he didn't work a lot, but he did well. He was into math. So then he does his PhD, or he gets into the PhD program at Harvard in decision sciences, which is basically applying mathematics to decision making. And then he goes to Salomon Brothers, becomes a bond trader, and maybe within 3 years is running the convertible bond arbitrage desk. And I talk a lot about portfolios of cash flows. Well, bonds are one example of a strip of cash flow, right? I mean, it's more than a strip of cash flow. It's a strip of cash flow plus a zero coupon bond, but we don't need to get into the specificities. Okay. So he's doing this, and he's really good at what he does. He makes over $400 million a year for the company in his trading book. Now, you know, what I like about trading is that there's no kind of BSing, right? At the end of the day, you know exactly how much you made and exactly how much you lost. And each desk is charged a certain rate of capital. So there's a cost of capital. And then there's a return you give on that capital. And on a risk-adjusted basis, you can determine every single day if the guy adds value or subtracts value. Very simple. You either make money or you lose money. There's no in-between. I guess you could break even, but you'd still get fired. So if you lose money, you get fired. If you don't make any money, i.e. you don't lose money or make money, you still get fired. And if you don't make enough money, you get fired. So it's very hard to keep these jobs. And of course he kept it. He got $3 million plus bonuses 3 years in a row. And at that time, Jamie Dimon and Weil took over Salomon Brothers, and they said to him, look, we're not going to pay you this kind of money. And he said, I have my FU money, and he split. And he hung around for a while, went back to Vancouver, got married, had some kids, bought some property, bought some art, got bored, and now he's one of the largest money managers in the world, based out of Vancouver, Canada. So the point I'm trying to make, and he's worth about $600 million. Now my question is about, or $700 million in Canadian dollars. My point is that if you take Jared Poland's very middle class idea that you got to work really super hard, that's the secret to success. And you compare the miner in Salgado's paintings with Hannibal. You ask yourself, is Hannibal working like 700 million times harder than the Salgado people? No, he's not. So the missing variable in Jared Poland's analysis is that, and I'm not knocking Jared Poland, by the way. I like the guy. He's a very talented guy in photography. I look at his video, his YouTube channel. You should too. It's called Frono's Photos. So go check it out. That middle class notion is really designed to keep middle class, right? I mean, I think what someone that's part of the investor class, that is someone who lives off of capital, says, is that what markets care about is effectiveness, right? What markets don't care about is how hard you work. I remember when I was on Wall Street, I had some young interns, and whenever they couldn't deliver something, they'd say, I couldn't deliver it, but I work really hard. And my response is, I don't pay you to work hard. I pay you to deliver value. And on another video, I talked about the value for value exchange. So what counts is how much value you create, not how hard you work. And it's perfectly possible to work really hard, not be effective, and not create any value. And that's what Hannibal understood. So in Hannibal's case, it's incontrovertible that he created $400 million for the company, because it was just him and some capital. Now, true, the firm provided the capital, and the firm provided computers, etc., and a team. But at the end of the day, money is a commodity. It's not a big deal. What counts is the brains behind the money, and Hannibal's a perfect example of that. So the point I'm trying to make is, be a little analytic. Question these middle class assumptions. I think if you want to achieve early financial freedom, which is what I talk about a lot on this YouTube channel, you've got to enhance the amount of value you're creating for society in economic terms. Now, I'm not one of these stupid people who think that Mother Teresa didn't add any value. My mother actually studied in the same institution that Mother Teresa taught while Mother Teresa was teaching there. That's kind of cool. So I'm not going to tell you Mother Teresa didn't add value, but I'm talking here on this channel about early financial freedom. And so that's the framework in which I'm looking at it. And early financial freedom, so you can use your leisure to pursue education and culture, right? So I would argue that Mother Teresa and her work is something you can do too if you achieve early financial freedom. So if that's your cup of tea, go do it. But you can do it too by being financially free. But if you're going to be financially free, you have to understand that concept. Add more value. Just shut up and add more value. I don't want to hear about how hard you're working. I don't want to hear how your day's going. I don't want to hear if you're a single mother. I just want you to add more value. You know, yesterday I was at dinner in New York with this person, a friend of mine, and the waitress was lousy. And in the middle of our conversation, she interrupts us and says, "Listen, I know I just gave you your food, but I have to leave early. Could I wrap up your bill?" And I said, "Well, what happens if I want more?" She goes, "No, I'm asking you to wrap up the bill because I'm a single mother." Now, I wasn't a complete jerk, but the thought I had was, who cares? You chose to be a single mother. You chose to be with somebody who split. Why am I suffering for that? Add value. I don't care. Again, I'm not saying this in a personal relationship. This is a commercial transaction. She wants a tip. She's there for money. Add value. I don't care. That's the trader's perspective. And it's a trader's perspective that I essentially espouse on this channel. Value for value exchange. Now let's think about this from an analytic point of view. Why is it that Hannibal was so added more value in economic terms? I can't overemphasize that. I'm not looking at other qualities like honesty and character. But in economic terms, why is it that he added so much value? Well, if you look at it analytically, what Jared Pullen and this middle class analysis is that output is a linear function of time. And that is to say that if you have an axis and the x-axis is time and the y-axis is value, basically every unit of time equals the same amount of value over time, right? So think of a lawyer. They charge X dollars an hour, you just pump out more hours, you pump out more money. But what smart people understand is it's about leverage, right? So think about compounding, right? Compounding is an exponential payoff profile, not a linear payoff profile. So what Jared Pullen is essentially saying is go engage in games where there's a linear payoff profile, so that the more hours you put in, the more you make. And what Hannibal understood is that if you have a ton of cash, the marginal increment of work you have to do is not equal to the amount of return you can get. So you can get an outsized payoff for a very small amount of work, right? In fact, what's cool about trading is people just leave when the markets close. So they're coming a bit early. So you look at those miners that Salgado was photographing, and they work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, Hannibal doesn't work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. He hops, skips, and jumps into the office in the morning, very early, probably 6 o'clock. But he's out of there by like 5. So So when you look at that example, how can you say if you work hard you will be successful? It's all about hard work. Nobody cares. You see the same thing with great writers. Did Hemingway really work hard? Did he work a lot harder than some author who's unsuccessful? No. Things like insight, things like brilliance. Did Beethoven work super hard? Well, I'm sure there was some work involved, but he didn't work 1,000 times as much as another composer. He just was good. He was effective. He created value. So what's the takeaway for today's video? The takeaway is that if you want to be part of the aristocratic investor class, you have to start thinking like the investor class. And that happens when you hang out with people like Hannibal or John Arnold, who I talked about before, who made $4 billion first year he started Centaur Capital. I used to work with him. These guys are good at what they do. They're really good at what they do, and that's not a subjective analysis. It's capital deployed and capital returned. Just like I define wealth as receiving cash flow that's multiples of the cash outflow. In the same way, in the business world, you can monitor and value your value add. So my suggestion to you is, as you go on this path, and I talked in a previous video about Tracy and the notion of setting a time frame of 20 years to achieve early financial freedom. As you engage in this path to early financial freedom and you're buying strips of cash flow, not playing the market, going for debt, not for equity, lending money, not playing around in markets, which you probably don't understand. Perhaps nobody understands them because they're random. As you go along this journey, it's about maximizing revenue, minimizing cost. Well, when you maximize your revenue, add more value. I was on this trip to Cornell for my business school where I did my MBA, and it was an alumni reunion. And in the car, there were two PhDs, and this one PhD had done a special MBA that they have at Cornell, a one-year MBA, which I'll make a video about later because I'm not a big fan. But anyway, so both of the people in the car had PhDs, and they were in this one-year MBA, just 4 PhDs. That's what the program is for. And I was talking to him, and what amazed me was he's very senior in Silicon Valley, and he makes a lot of money, I assume. But he was talking about what he does on the weekends. And he says what he does is take courses. He takes these LinkedIn courses, and he takes these Microsoft courses, all online, all for free. And I said, well, you already have a PhD, you have an Ivy League MBA from Cornell. Why do you need to take courses? And his answer was really interesting. He said, well, I add credentials onto my LinkedIn profile because I want to constantly keep up with the latest of what's going on. So I'm always looking not only to add more in my area of expertise, but to learn different areas of expertise. And I found that really, really interesting. Here's a guy that wants to add more value, and this is a guy who already has achieved a lot. He has a PhD, he has an Ivy League MBA. So that is my takeaway. Add value. Think about how to add value. Don't whine. Nobody wants to hear if you're a single mother. Nobody wants to hear if you worked hard. Nobody cares. If you want to achieve early financial freedom, kick some ass, take 20 years, get it done, retire early, become a full-time traveler, pursue education and culture. Take care.